listener production.
Hey, Tara Cassidy with you and welcome to The Briefing. Sequels, remakes and reboots are dominating the box office at the moment. So has Hollywood forgotten how to tell a new story?
There's so many platforms and options and so much content coming at people at the moment that marketing something is a challenge. And if you have some sort of nugget of familiarity, it just gives you an advantage.
So why we're getting a new Superman and a second Devil Wears Prada is coming up in the second half of this episode. First though, let's get into the headlines with Chris Spyrou. It's Friday the 4th of July.
Hey Tara, and to you listening. We're starting overseas today where football fans and legends as well as political leaders are paying tribute to Liverpool FC star Diogo Jota and his brother Andre Silva. The 28-year-old Portuguese forward died yesterday alongside his brother after their Lamborghini went off the road due to a tyre blowout and crashed before bursting into flames.
Thousands of fans have gathered at Liverpool's home ground, Anfield Stadium, to pay tribute to Jota, who married his long-term partner, who he had 3 kids with, just 10 days ago, with fans sharing their devastation at the loss.
You'll never walk alone. There's never a truer word spoken, is there? You know, you have a lump in your throat thinking about his poor mother, the way she's lost 2 sons so tragically, it's terrible, it's absolutely terrible.
Among those taking to socials overnight is Portuguese captain Cristiano Ronaldo, who won the UEFA Nations League with him just last month, as well as football legend David Beckham and tennis champ Rafael Nadal. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer says millions of football fans would be shocked at the news, while Portugal's PM says he had greatly honoured the country's name.
Yeah, we've also heard from the club itself, Liverpool FC, a club he's been with since 2020, and he'd been at star forward in this year's Premier League that they had gone on to win. He was, a fan favourite. They did really, really love this man. The club described it as an unimaginable loss in a very brief statement, promising to provide his family, friends and teammates their, quote, full support.
An alleged child sex offender may have been in contact with kids on more occasions than police were first informed about. 26-year-old Joshua Brown is facing 70 child sex abuse-related charges relating to offending against 8 victims at a Point Cook centre in Melbourne, with police now looking into 19 other centres he worked at in Victoria. Police allege Brown also contaminated children's food with bodily fluids, leading to 1,200 children needing to be tested for infectious diseases like gonorrhea, chlamydia and syphilis.
The government and Victorian police have since released a list of centres that Brown worked at, as well as the dates, so that concerned parents can check if their children have attended at the same time. However, multiple parents have come out to say they're aware of Brown working at some of the centres on additional dates than those listed, some alleging he'd been at certain workplaces up to 3 months longer than what had been outlined. According to the ABC, one parent whose child attended an early learning centre in Essendon while Brown was employed says they weren't contacted by police about their child's potential contact with the 26-year-old due to the dates mix-up.
Yeah, and meanwhile, the federal government has since confirmed that it will fast-track child safety legislation and has appointed a former South Australian Premier, Jay Weatherill, to carry out an urgent review into the sector. Now, the legislation, it's expected to be introduced in the next sitting week, and it will aim to expand powers to allow on-the-spot checks of staff, see funding cuts for any centres that don't pass safety standards, while the possible installation of CCTV cameras at early learning centres is also up for discussion.
Back to the UK now, where the BBC has told some senior members of staff to step back from their roles in music and live events following the broadcast of Bob Vylan's Glastonbury set, where its frontman led the crowd into a chant calling on the death of the Israeli Defence Force. In a statement, the public broadcaster, who's received backlash over televising the set, says the punk duo were one of 7 acts it had deemed high risk prior to the music festival, saying moving forward, any performances that are high risk will no longer be broadcast or streamed live. live.
Yeah, and the BBC also says that there is no place for anti-Semitism in its output and that it was a mistake that the live stream wasn't cut, with its Director General apologising to viewers and staff, as well as members of the Jewish community. Now, since Glastonbury, Bob Villan, who are being criminally investigated for inciting violence and have had their US visas revoked, have actually spoken out, and they're saying that they are being targeted for speaking up over Gaza, adding, quote, "We are not for the death of Jews, Arabs or any other race or group of people. We are not the story. We are a distraction from the story." Now, Chris, I'm interested, what do you think? Because for me, it comes down to, I guess, what they actually meant by the words. Their supporters are saying that they weren't calling for the death of any people, rather the end of the military who's been involved in killing innocent civilians. So if that's the argument, I guess I can understand that side of it, but that's not what the BBC and the government and the police are saying.
Yeah, and they're framing it as an anti-Semitism issue. And, you know, we have heard from some people who were in the crowd, who were Jewish in the crowd, saying that it did make them feel uncomfortable and unsafe. While in theory, I do support this idea of not live streaming or broadcasting high-risk performances, I'm a little bit skeptical. I'm a little bit fearful about who gets to call the shots on what's high risk and what's not. And as we know, decisions are made by those who have long held control. And I wonder what level of diversity is present in a room that gets to make these decisions.
Qantas has promised to strengthen its security measures after a cyber attack impacted up to 6 million of its customers earlier this week. Cyber criminals managed to steal customers' personal information by gaining access to a third-party system used by Qantas staff. Now, the airline says impacted customers have been emailed, with experts supposedly saying that this information hasn't yet been posted anywhere on the dark web. Yet.
Yeah, yet is the operative word. Always, Tara. Meanwhile, it comes as the country's privacy watchdog is warning about the rise of scams targeting companies, particularly via vishing or voice phishing. Now, vishing is a type of social engineered cyber attack where scammers use phone calls to trick individuals or companies into revealing sensitive information.
Yeah, and apparently criminals will literally go as far as calling a company's IT department while impersonating an employee to gain access to their work computer and try to bypass security and authentication measures, which is wild to me, but they're saying that it's actually really quite prevalent. And according to a government report, these types of attacks actually make up nearly 30% of all reported data breaches from malicious or criminal attacks in Australia, and government agencies are the most at risk.
Oh, gosh.
Suddenly our work sending out those fake scam phishing emails trying to test us of whether we'd actually fall for this is making a lot more sense, Chris.
Yeah, and look, I'm going to just go on the record and say I haven't fallen for any of these phishing scams, but some of them are really good. It's like it's actually got our CEO's name in it, or it's got people who you know and you recognise. It puts their name and signature in it. So it is quite sophisticated what they do. But for me, I'm kind of like the information my IT department has about me, like the security questions and some of the embarrassing shit I've written there. I do not want phishers getting access to that at all.
And we, again, want to finish the week with you guys, our listeners. We asked a bunch of questions this week, everything to do with Aussie slang and uni placements to your drinking habits. Now, first up, we wanted to know whether you guys think uni and TAFE students should get paid for their placements after news that some students, like those in nursing, will now get paid over $300 a week for their placements, which is a win for them. But it's kind of sucky news for the industries that found out that they will miss out and still do placements and internships for free.
Yeah, you guys all said overwhelmingly yes, absolutely, they should be paid. One listener, Georgie, reckons it'll help students and grads feel less disenfranchised and give them self-worth. I agree with that, Georgie. That's a really good point. Justin also said yes, and that the pay rate should be okay, and it doesn't need to match full-time wages as it'll motivate them to prove themselves for the real deal job, which also I agree with.
Good point.
Yeah.
Well, Alana P says that during her social work placement, she did 1,000 hours for $0. Oh my gosh, Alana, I feel for you. Been there. I can say I did not do 1,000 hours. That is nuts. Meanwhile, guys, we also asked you yesterday if you'll be joining the estimated 3.2 million Aussies taking part in Dry July, which is 8% of you saying you were. 13% of you said you were on the low alcohol bevies, like me. 26% of you said you don't drink anyway, while 53% of you are like Chris and said you're just going to keep doing you for the month of July and we'll keep drinking.
Oh,
there you go, Chris.
Love this. A bit of solidarity with our listeners. We love to see it. Hey, that is it for headlines for this week. What a massive, massive week in news. But we have a pretty good deep dive, if I do say so myself. It's my deep dive looking into why every single movie announcement is a remake or a sequel or something that has already existed in Hollywood for years and years and years. Stick around. That deep dive is coming up for you next. I'm going to play something for you, and I want you to take one guess which upcoming movie it's promoting.
The most powerful being on planet Earth. Now, as planned, I'll destroy you.
Good luck with that.
It's not a bird, not a plane, but the Man of Steel himself, Superman, again. The 11th reimagining of the film is hitting cinemas next week, and it's tipped to be a box office hit. Unlike Disney and Pixar's newly released animation Elio, which made $31 million in its opening weekend last month, making it the studio's worst ever opening on record. Compare that now to Disney's live-action remake of Lilo and Stitch, and that shattered box office records, earning $548 million in its first week alone. And with The Devil Wears Prada #2 now officially in production, it begs the question, why are the studios serving up the same stories? And more importantly, why do we, as audiences, keep turning to them? Michael Lucas is an award-winning screenwriter and producer from shows like Wentworth, Offspring, and the ABC's Newsreader, and he joins me now. Michael, welcome back to The Briefing. The 11th live-action remake of Superman is hitting cinemas next week. How many more reimaginings of Superman do we need, Michael Lucas?
Well, I should state at the start, I have my tickets booked for an IMAX session of that, so I'm very much part of this trend. And if you ask me when it comes to Superman, I have an appetite for far more. In fact, I'm craving for a good one. It feels like quite a conscious pivot away from sort of the dark kind of superhero movie that we've been getting for about 15 years now. I mean, the last incarnation of the character did try and push Superman into more of a moody territory with Henry Cavill. And so clearly they're trying to make something that's a bit more fun. It's the director of Guardians of the Galaxy. They're clearly trying to build a universe because if the trailers are to be believed, there's a bazillion other superheroes and supervillains in the movie. So they're universe building, and it appears that they're trying to invite us into quite a fun, sunny universe.
I want to talk about universe building for a second. A lot of people have pointed the finger in a good and bad way at Marvel, but how have the Marvel cinematic universes changed the way that films are being made and consumed in 2025?
Marvel was so successful for so long, and it just proved that IP, intellectual property, pulls people to a cinema like nothing else. And I think the success of that has obviously led the studios to think people want to come to the movies to see characters and stories that they know, that they're familiar with, that there's a sort of a built-in audience for already. And still, we're in a world where most of the big blockbusters, almost all of them, in fact, are pre-existing characters that we're invested in.
Which brings us, to today, to Disney and Pixar's latest release, Elio. It's an original, but it has recorded the lowest opening in Pixar's history. Based on the reviews, though, it doesn't appear to be a terrible movie. So what do you think's behind that quote-unquote flop?
Yeah, well, I mean, it seems like it's hard to get people to come to the movies for originals these days, which is pretty sad news, especially when it comes to Pixar, who for a solid couple of decades there, they were the standard bearer of original stories from, Toy Story and Monsters, Inc., Nemo and Up and WALL-E, all of them were complete and genuine originals. Like even Disney back in the day were always adaptations. Pixar were churned out these original classics time and time again. But in recent years, like last year, I think they had their biggest ever earner with Inside Out 2. So people will flock to see that. But when they're presented with the news story, there's a hesitation. Going to the movies is very expensive these days. It has to compete with streaming, which is an enormous factor. Like, if you're going to spend potentially hundreds of dollars to take your families to the movies, you kind of want to take the risk away from the equation. And if you're going to see, you know your kids are going to enjoy Inside Out 2, or you know your kids are going to enjoy Lilo and Stitch. It's proven. It's a safe bet. You're not going to blow your money.
One of the reviews I read from Elio said that it was a really well thought out storyline, but perhaps audience appetites at the moment, given our attention spans are shrinking rapidly thanks to that old app TikTok. They mention and they fear that perhaps audiences aren't really engrossed in complex storylines and are just wanting to go to the movies to see something simple, some sort of escapism.
I feel like Elio will soon be on Disney Plus and it will have a huge audience there. And I think a part of this is that during the pandemic, Pixar all of their originals started going to Disney Plus. So people got used to the idea of you can just see the latest Pixar there. I'm not so sure that people no longer have an appetite for complicated stories or anything like that. I mean, all of Christopher Nolan's movies, for example, I know he's in a completely different thing, but I mean, Oppenheimer was not a simple movie to understand and people absolutely flocked to it. In a different way, those Marvel movies, they were really complicated and you had to be across several different television shows and comics and all these to make sense of all the references and everything like that. But I feel like movies that have some sort of communal vibe, or even horror movies, they still do well. And I think it's because they're better to watch communally than they are alone. And nostalgia, I would say, is an emotion that really works in a communal sense. It's why, like, aging rockers and pop stars, their greatest hits tours do so well and they charge so much for, because people love to share that nostalgic feeling. So I would put it down to that.
Realistically, we don't have a shortage of original films. They're still being made, but they just rarely turn into box office hits. What do you think's holding back these films from becoming box office hits? And from the sounds of it, should we be measuring success based on box office performance anymore?
I do think that the biggest factor that has come in is streaming. And I feel like we're only starting to process what it's really meant that over the past 15 years, all of a sudden we've got, be it TikTok or YouTube or Netflix and all the other streaming services, like that's a quantum shift in how we consume entertainment. Also, I would point out, like, in a general sense, originality is not dead, because yes, when you look at the top 10 in the box office, you're seeing nothing but, How to Train Your Dragon and Lilo and Stitch. And I'm going to see Jurassic World this weekend. But when you think about what's coming on the Emmys, like the likely Emmy big nominees are going to be things like The Pit, or they're going to be things like The Studio, or, Severance. All of these are kind of like strikingly original things. So it's not like it's impossible.
You're in writing rooms and production rooms without burning any bridges. Is it getting harder to pitch and sell original stories? Or, I understand that The Newsreader was a bit of a period drama. It was something that tapped into the nostalgia of the 80s, the Australian newsroom. Where are we at, do you think, in Australia with this? You
do hear people wanting to riff on IP, intellectual property, some sort of hook in for an audience. And I think and that's even in television too. And I think it's a factor of there's so many platforms and options and so much content coming at people at the moment that marketing something is a challenge. And if you have some sort of nugget of familiarity, it just gives you an advantage. And, one show that I worked on, Wentworth, that did hook into a bit of IP. And I'm sure that part of the calculation of commissioning that was that Foxtel knew that there was an audience that loved Prisoner that would be intrigued to see how that was reimagined. And so I definitely feel that, but I would also say in the land of television and streaming, there is still a definite hunger for original stories. A tougher proposition is cinema.
Do you think remake fatigue is setting in, or do you think studios can still stretch nostalgia a little further before that bubble bursts? Because seeing the reactions online to HBO's upcoming Harry Potter series, the reactions to whatever Tina Fey did with Mean Girls, and then anytime diversity trickles into a Disney remake, the conversations online and the way that we talk about them isn't entirely positive.
I do think that sometimes it looks like there's fatigue. I remember at the start of the year when Snow White, the remake that Disney made, didn't, match expectations. There was a sense of, that whole era of children's films remakes is coming to an end. And then, of course, we had Lilo and Stitch and How to Train Your Dragon, which were absolutely enormous. So it all went out the window. Up until now, all the streamers have been quite guarded about having their properties go to big screens. But I feel like this weekend was a bit of a turning point, certainly in that Apple had the #1 movie in the world with F1, which was an original. It was an original movie. And that's made a ton of money, and it's going to be huge when they put it on Apple Plus. And sometimes I wonder things like, you know what? I was obsessed with Succession. If all of a sudden they said the last 2 episodes of Succession are going to be, you have to go to a cinema to watch them, or we're going to live stream, or we're going to release them, whatever, I probably would have gone. So I wonder whether those other platforms are going to become the birthplace of originality that then, once it gets big enough and once it develops a community and everything like that, it starts to progress its way to cinema. I think that there is a historical precedent for this. A lot of people talk about when television came in for the first time, but I would go even further back, 100 years back. When cinema first exploded in the 1920s, when talkies came in and it really spread everywhere, like at that point, the #1 entertainment platform in the Western world was actually vaudeville.
Sorry, what?
Yeah, exactly.
What is that?
Well, essentially just look at it as like on stage, like Saturday Night Live. Vaudeville was like a collection of comedians and everything. But that was, when we say show business, originally that term came from the show was vaudeville shows. And so it was live theatres and skits and everything like that. And cinema came in and then just changed the game because cinema was more affordable. You didn't have to travel as far to get to it. They could put on as many session times a day as they could squash in, and it just blitzed and vaudeville died. Theatre didn't die. What ended up happening was the genre that was birthed was actually the musical. That rose up in terms of like what is going to get people back into our theatres to see live shows. And so in terms of cinema at the moment, everyone's like reaching and clutching at the past. But I guess if I'm being optimistic, I hope that maybe there'll be some rethink about how we imagine what a cinema experience can be, and maybe it'll lead to some sort of new form. I wish I could tell you what that form will be, but clearly it's got to be something new because we can't just keep reheating nachos, as Lady Gaga would say.
Well, what a beautiful note to take us out on. And, for now we can settle for musical sing-alongs anytime a Wicked movie comes out. So that's a beautiful place for the cinema to continue evolving.
And I will.
Michael Lucas, thank you so much for joining us again on The Briefing.
Thanks very much.
That was award-winning screenwriter and producer Michael Lucas speaking with me there. And that is it for this episode of The Briefing. Before you go, though, we would love for you to share your thoughts on this episode and whether you like these remakes, whether you care about them, and whether you'll be going to watch Superman or any of the other ones that are coming out in the next few months. We will be back, of course, this afternoon with an episode with Natasha Belling, and you have The Weekend Briefing with Antoinette Lattouf coming up on the weekend. But until then, I will see you on Monday. I'm Chris Spyrou. Catch you then.
Listener.